Hey YouTube, today's case is going to be a tough one. In light of the recent release, Quiet on Set, the docuseries on HBO Max, I wanted to make a video detailing two of the men employed at Nickelodeon who would eventually be convicted for child exploitation charges. I recommend giving this series a watch as it does a really good job at exposing the predators in Hollywood. But remember, predators are everywhere in our society, not just there. Always remember to be on your guard with your children around strangers and talk to them about these things. Today we'll go over the roles of these men, as well as the crimes themselves, and what, if any, punishment they eventually faced. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Blue, and I'm a police officer in Florida with 10 years of experience. I post all things true crime here, so if you're interested in that sort of thing, consider subscribing, and turn on those notifications, as I post pretty frequently, including breaking news crime stories. As a disclaimer, these opinions are mine based on my own personal experiences in the field, and not the opinions of any department or organization. With all that said, let's get into today's video. Let's start our story with perhaps the most prolific pedophile documented on the show, and that's Jason Handy. Jason began his career with Nickelodeon in the mid-90s, around the age of 25. He got himself into a position that would be coveted by any pedophile. As it turns out, he was in charge of being the only adult to take child actors around the set, in the areas that parents were not allowed. In his downtime, he would hang out and get close to the parents, as he was friendly and charismatic. Jason had managed to worm himself into a position that allowed him very close access to young children, and this would be both in and out of his job at Nickelodeon. In his personal time, he also volunteered at his local church, and was actually in charge of a group of 6-year-old children. Eventually, Jason would make his move on a young actress, known only as Brandy. Brandy worked on The Amanda Show, a hugely popular show that I myself watched religiously as a child. Jason's MO, or modus operandi, was to get close enough to a child to be in regular contact with them, which in the case of Brandy, he did by emailing her on a regular basis. This was something the mother did not have problems with, as she viewed it as harmless. Yes, she viewed her very young daughter exchanging emails with a man approaching or in his 30s as harmless. Eventually, these innocent emails would go down a much darker road, as the predator in Jason exposed himself, quite literally. One day, Brandy's mother reports seeing her on the computer before she suddenly became upset, running away from the computer and into her bedroom. When her mother asked her what was wrong, Brandy told her she had received an email from Jason. Brandy's mother then went and checked the email, and saw that it was an email from Jason. This email, however, was extremely graphic, as it was a picture of himself, naked and masturbating. In the email, Jason had written that he wanted Brandy to know that he was thinking about her. This photo must have been both graphic and clear, likely picturing his face, as he was immediately recognized. Now, the mother made a decision that she is being greatly criticized for, and to some extent, I actually agree with that criticism. She made the decision to not call the police, or report the crime her daughter had just been a victim of. That crime, in Florida anyway, is transmission of material harmful to minors by electronic device or equipment. In order to prove this crime, you have to prove that the defendant, in this case Jason, knew the victim Brandy was underage. We for sure have that. You must also prove that he sent material that was harmful to a minor electronically, and again, you have both of those. This is a third-degree felony, at least in Florida. I was not able to view if they had this statute at this time in California, but I'm sure they did, or at least something similar. But we'll never know. Instead, Brandy's mother decided to just pull her daughter out of the child acting industry overall. No contact with police, no talking to the executives at Nickelodeon to have Jason fired, nothing. Imagine seeing a shark at a crowded beach. Instead of alerting everyone to its presence, you decide to get out of the water, and leave all those other families in the water with that predator. That's exactly what Brandy's mother did. If she had called the police and pressed charges, then it's likely Jason would have been fired and jailed. But, as we'll see here soon, he likely would have gotten a very short sentence for this crime. And with predators like Jason, there is no fixing them. You must remove them from the population if you want to keep children safe. As you'll soon see, that's the only way. Let's look at an article detailing how Jason would eventually come into the eyes of law enforcement. Jason Handy had no criminal record when the Los Angeles Police Department's Sexually Exploited Child Unit opened an investigation back in 2003, after they were contacted by police in Michigan. The Nickelodeon production assistant had allegedly lured a 14-year-old girl via the internet with the promise of a television career, and had flown to Michigan to meet her, according to court documents and a person familiar with the case. He reportedly met her at her middle school, engaged in inappropriate acts, and invited her to his hotel room. During its investigation, the LAPD revealed that Handy was also attempting to prey on children at his church, in his neighborhood, over the internet, and in the workplace. A search of his residence turned up thousands of images of child pornography and erotica, as well as other evidence. Handy was arrested in April of 2003 and ultimately charged with 5 felony counts of committing lewd acts on a child sexual exploitation, sending harmful material via the internet, and possessing child pornography. Court testimony revealed that during the taping of the TV series Cousin Skeeter, Handy befriended a 9-year-old girl and began visiting her at her home. Again, we wonder how the parents would allow something like this to happen. On one occasion, while playing video games in her bedroom, he repeatedly kissed her. Now, going back to some of those pictures that were found in his house, some of them were pictures that Jason himself took. More than 1,000 photos of girls at the elementary school across the street from his house, using a camera with a telephoto lens, according to court documents. Some were pictures of children that were nude, and others were children engaged in sexual activities. This man not only should have gone to prison for the rest of his life, he should have been put in a box under the prison. A journal was found in his home, where Jason described himself as a full-blown pedophile. Also in that journal was an entry where Jason wrote things like this, and I'm quoting, "I even suffer on a daily basis with the question of how I can find a victim to sexually assault if I must, and I really have been giving in to my desire for small girls for some time. It disgusts me to even read this off to you." Also found in his home were Ziploc bags containing small items that were taken from or symbolic of the children he lusted after, with their names written on the bags. One of these bags, labeled Brandy, contained letters that she had sent to him. This seems to border on the realm of what you'd find in a serial killer's home. But despite this, despite the pictures, the evidence, the victims testifying, and his own admittance of this horrific desire, he was given 6 years. Just 6 years. The victims and police did everything they could to ensure this monster faced justice for his crimes. But these are the issues with our so-called justice system that I've been talking about since I started this channel. You can have victims who are willing to relive their worst experiences to testify in court. You can have police who are efficient and dedicated and do an outstanding investigation to build a case and get these criminals off of the streets. But the place where this normally breaks down is the state attorney's office, who loves to offer plea deals instead of going to trial. And even if you get a good state attorney who refuses to offer a plea deal and pushes to go to trial, the courts are infested with judges who absolutely thrive on giving criminals soft sentences. And can you even rehabilitate someone like this? In my opinion, absolutely not. And that would be shown too. Jason would serve 6 years and get out of prison around 2009, after being given parole a year early. That's right, he was let loose a year early and was not seen as a threat to the community. The deck is stacked against citizens and police in terms of keeping actual criminals locked up for any length of time. In 2014, just several years later, he would be arrested again. He was charged with 3 counts of indecent liberties with a child and an additional 2 counts of sex offender registry violations. He was held on a $1 million bail, and eventually he was convicted again, but this time it was in the federal courts. I'll put up the North Carolina state statute for indecent liberties with a child here so you can see what it entails. In essence, Jason went right back to his old pedophilic ways. A predator will always be a predator. Never forget that. But this time, the courts would actually carry out justice. Instead of just a few years, Jason was sentenced to at least 24 years in a federal prison. But it took the feds getting involved to make this happen. You see, the federal courts have an above 90% conviction rate, and so they can offer a plea deal that carries a ton of time. And most people still take it because the chances of winning at trial are so low. So, there will Jason remain until he comes out. But don't be surprised if we hear his name again when he is released. As long as there is breath in his lungs, Jason will likely reoffend. Around the same time, Jason worked alongside Brian Peck. Peck was actually shown on Nickelodeon shows as a reoccurring character, Pickle Boy. I'll leave a picture up here that is self-explanatory. Brian would eventually work his way into the life of Nickelodeon star Drake Bell. Again, I highly recommend that you watch this docuseries to see how a predator works. Brian not only used his position and charisma to get close to Drake, but he also worked behind the scenes to separate Drake from his father. He spent months convincing Drake to get rid of his father as a manager. Drake's father was always around him and drove him everywhere. Drake and his father attended everything together, and this is the safest possible way for a child actor to navigate an environment with such a mass number of strangers. Eventually, Drake as a 15-year-old made the call to fire his father as his manager, and instead gave this power to his mother. We should note here that Drake's mother and father were separated. But Drake's mother did not have the same care for Drake's career that his father did, and could not even be bothered to drive him to casting sessions and rehearsals, at least the ones that were far off. So who stepped in but Brian Peck? Ever the good guy, right? And eventually, Brian would begin to have sessions with Drake at his home, where the abuse would begin to take place. I'd like to take a moment here and play a clip for you guys before we move on to what crimes Peck actually committed against a juvenile Drake. This is convicted child predator Jack Reynolds. He claims to have over 300 victims and served 12 years in prison. He details what steps he took and what signs he looked for in children to begin to groom and abuse them. Listen to his account and compare it to Drake's own account when you watch Quiet on Set. The similarities are shocking, and this should be taken as a warning by parents on what to watch out for. Jack himself was a youth baseball umpire, referee, and mentor, putting himself in positions that would allow him the closest access to his victims. Are you seeing a common theme here? Let's take a look at the video, a clip about 2 minutes long.
How did you get them alone?
Grooming. I would check out their family situation. I would check out their clothing to see how well they were, financially. I would check out their social interaction with other kids. When we were on the ballparks or on the gym floor, I would make sure which ones I wanted to molest. I would give them special attention, congratulate them, talk to them when I know that I would never be allowed to talk to anybody else. Aside from everybody, I would give them the attention that an official is not supposed to give anybody. And it made them feel like, wow, he's paying me attention. It is a direct form of grooming.
Were there certain characteristics that you looked for in children before molesting them?
In children, yes, but more I also looked at their families. If I thought the father was a threat, I would not approach the child. If I thought that the child had friends that he would tell, I would not approach him. If I thought the child had friends that were in the same capacity he was, I would approach him. For the simple fact that if I could molest him, I could lure him into believing, grooming him into believing that he would enjoy it. And therefore, I could manipulate him into having his other friends come and be molested by me as well.
So perhaps a child that doesn't really have a whole lot of friends, maybe not really a strong family, things like that.
Yes, no spiritual values, weak in education, needs help in many ways, even from split parenting, has a mother who may be having problems with the family, well, here comes superhero in to help out, wow, well, thank you very much. No problem. You ever need me to take him away for the night so you can have a night out? No problem. It works.
Shocking, right? And keep in mind, this is a free man walking around. Also keep in mind that Drake's father in interviews claimed that he noticed that Brian was overly touchy with Drake, including putting his arms around his waist and just touching him whenever he could. This was the first red flag, and his father should have addressed this immediately. So let's get back to Brian Peck. Once he successfully isolated Drake from his father, he abused him for a period of 6 months. Here are the charges he faced. Brian Peck was charged with 11 counts against Drake in 2003, and here's what they are. Lewd act upon a child, sodomy of a person under 16, attempted sodomy of a person under 16, sexual penetration by a foreign object, 4 counts of oral copulation of a person under 16, oral copulation by anesthesia or controlled substance, sending harmful matter, and using a minor for sex acts. Let me break some of that down. Oral copulation is just another term for oral sex. It would appear to me that Brian was charged for each instance of abuse that Drake could remember over the 6-month period. He was abused by Brian's own sexual organs, and Brian also used other objects to abuse Drake as well. In one instance, based on the charge, it appears that Drake was also drugged and then abused. Sending harmful matter was most likely pornographic material, and the final charge, using a minor for sex acts, was a separate charge for the same crimes listed before. When I look up the charges for this case, it appears that the sodomy charge alone, each one, is punishable by up to 3, 6, 7, or 9 years in prison, depending on the source that I can find, and this is for that time period. Keep in mind, these charges seem to have stiffer penalties now than they have in the past. But imagine, that's just for one charge. These are felonies after all. Also keep in mind that Drake got Peck to admit to these crimes on a recorded line with police present. And yet after all that, we see a shorter sentence than even Jason got, just 16 months in prison. There are a slew of actors that gave letters to the court on behalf of Peck, and I'll leave a link to that in the comments so you can read them in full, even more so than the docuseries showed. Peck would do his time, and come right out into a job with Disney on The Sweet Life of Zack and Cody. Again, the Predator immediately put himself in a position to be around his victims, young children. Now Disney would fire him after supposedly learning about his conviction, but I doubt this. In the industry, it's very likely that his crimes were well known, as he was well known in television at the time. His firing was most likely a result of bad publicity. Keep in mind, Peck continued to work in television even after this, all the way up until 2018 at the least. It seems that there's no real justice for the victims of this abuse, is there? Even for the most vulnerable people of our society, our children. It's time we really ask ourselves an important question. Is there a hope of rehabilitation for child sexual offenders? Should we even risk it if there was? Why not make any sexual offense on a child a lifetime imprisonment? Some would say that's too much, too harsh, but we know the punishments given in these cases were terribly insufficient. But what extent are we willing to go to in protecting our children? If the courts will continue to keep predators on the streets, then learn from what we went over today. Watch and consider rewatching that interview I included earlier, and learn what these monsters look for. Do whatever you can to protect your children, and never leave them in the hands of another, like we learned from Drake's mother as an example. But that's going to bring us to the end of today's case, guys. This is tragic and disgusting to think about these light sentences after such horrible abuse. But I hope that it does open our eyes to the number and tactics of these monsters, and just how prevalent they are. If you enjoyed the video and made it this far, consider subscribing. I post at least weekly, but normally several times a week with true crime related topics, including trending cases about missing persons, so also make sure to hit that notification bell. Let me know what you guys think about the case in the comments, and if you have any suggestions for a future case, let me know there as well. And as always guys, stay safe and stay tuned.